Hi everyone, good day. Trust we're having a lovely day. So today we'll be looking at CSS, and as you can see on the screen, CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. That's the full meaning of CSS, Cascading Style Sheets. So we're going to look into what is CSS, the history of CSS, how and where to use CSS. So it's going to be fun. But as usual, as anything that has to do with coding or programming, we know how it goes, right? We first of all do a lot of reading because you want to get background information, you want to read a lot of documentations to know how it works and how to use it before you ever go into writing the code, right? So just like we did with HTML, we're going to first do a lot of boring reading, but it is very important, right? I'm going to try and gather as much information as possible so that when we begin to practicalize it, that information can now become knowledge, right? Because you don't know it unless you've done it. So right now we're just gathering information that will help us do it. Okay, so let's look into it. So here we have introduction to CSS. What is CSS? CSS, Cascading Style Sheets, is a language that describes the style of an HTML document and describes how HTML elements should be displayed. So there are two keywords I want you to take note of here: style and displayed. CSS is also a language like HTML, but what it does is that it specifies the style of your HTML document. So right now we've been creating many HTML documents, but they just look boring. Everything is just default black and white or whatever default setting that the browser gives those HTML elements. Well, we all know that we live in a world whereby we visit different websites, different applications, and they all have vastly different styles, different design language. How did they come about those designs? That is where CSS come in. CSS make things beautiful, they make things look appealing. It specifies how HTML elements should be displayed and how they should be styled, right? So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. CSS describes how HTML elements are to be displayed on screen, paper, or in other media. CSS saves a lot of work. It can control the layout of multiple web pages all at once. External style sheets are stored in CSS files. So yeah, CSS, you can use your CSS to style a whole lot of course you can style your HTML elements within HTML, although that tends to be way more difficult. It's not easy to do. That is difficult. It takes a lot of time and it's not scalable, right? So it means if you have just maybe a code base that have over 1,000 lines of code, how do you want to be specifying all the styles within the HTML? Everything just gets clunky, gets very difficult to work with, right? To scale, to improve. So that is another very important advantage of CSS. In your CSS, you can specify a style that will apply across 10 different HTML documents, or 50 or 100, as long as they are linked to the same CSS file, right? So it saves a lot of work. It's very scalable. It's easy to do. Okay, they also have external style sheets are stored in CSS files. So we'll get to understand what this means later on. For now, let's just keep that. So the history. CSS was first developed in 1997 as a way for developers to define the visual appearance of web pages that they were creating. It was intended to allow web professionals to separate the content and structure of website code from the visual design, right? So they created it as a way to separate the structure from the style so that it is easier to manage both separately. Something that had not been possible prior to this time. So before 1997, it was not possible to specify the structure of a web page different from its style. The separation of structure and style allows HTML to perform more of its original function, the markup of content, without having to worry about the design and layout of the page itself. Okay, something commonly known as look and feel of the page. So HTML was designed to specify the markup of content, not look and feel. So they created CSS as a way to make a new language that deals specifically with the look and feel of a web page. Okay. CSS didn't gain popularity until around 2000, when web browsers began using more than the basic font and color aspects of this markup language. As CSS continues to evolve and new styles are introduced, web browsers have begun to implement modules that bring new CSS support into these browsers and give web designers powerful new styling tools to work with. So just something to quickly point out after this is that CSS is a technological development, right? So as with any other technological development, it takes time to implement, and different companies implement them differently. So for example, now everybody can relate with this. We have electric vehicles, we have electric cars. When Tesla started making electric cars, they were not the only ones that were making it, but when they started, the companies were very few. Most of the other automotive brands or even motorcycle companies, they were not making electric vehicles, right? It took years before everybody started rolling out their own EVs. So it's the same thing with CSS, because I'm probably wondering how it relates. But just like the same way CSS is a new technology, different browsers support different aspects of it gradually. So you might try something on this browser and it will not work depending on how old the browser is. That's why as a web developer, you're advised to always have the latest version of every application that you're using, because this is a field that things are always evolving, things are always changing, there are always new technologies, new improvements, and so on and so forth. And even with the very latest versions of every web browser, you notice that something looks different on Chrome, it looks different on Safari, it looks different on Mozilla. Don't worry, eventually you run into using things like WebKit. So don't panic when you notice that it looks a bit different or there's something that is not even working on a certain browser. It happens. It takes these companies different timelines to implement these technologies. Okay, so I just wanted to point that out. Let's continue going. This image here is the schematic of the evolution of CSS from 1 to 3. I think we're in CSS 3 now, right? Background. HTML was never intended to contain tags for formatting web page. HTML was created to describe the content of a web page. So HTML was basically created to describe the content of the web page. I think this is straightforward, doesn't really need much explanation. So when tags like font and color attributes were added to HTML 3.2 specification, it created huge problems for web developers. Development of large websites where fonts and color information were added to every single page became a long and expensive process. To solve this problem, the World Wide Web Consortium created CSS. CSS removed the style formatting from the HTML page. So what it's basically saying is that at some point, now currently we are in HTML5, right? As at HTML 3.2, they introduced some tags like fonts, color attributes to make it possible for you to style your HTML within HTML. But then it was difficult because you have to style every single page independently, right? So that's why the World Wide Web Consortium created CSS. So CSS removed the style formatting from the HTML page and made CSS that so that you can style it separately, and that style can even be applied to way more than one HTML document at a time. The style definitions are normally saved in external .css files, so that's the extension. Just like we have HTML documents that end with .html, your CSS files also end with .css. With an external style sheet file, you can change the look of an entire website by changing just one file, which is a lot of ease it reuses a lot of work for you as web developers. It makes your work way more easier, right? So we have CSS example, is this really necessary? Okay. The CSS Zen Garden is a World Wide Web consortium resource built to demonstrate what can be accomplished visually through CSS-based design. Style sheets contributed by designers from around the world are used to change the visual representation of a single HTML file, producing hundreds of different designs. Explore the CSS Zen Garden example files which are supplied. So just if you are really interested in that, visit this website here. That's www.csszengarden.com, and you get a more visual example of what this is trying to explain. Okay, so I think that's basically a very, very short but straight to the point explanation for CSS. Okay, so just to recap everything, or to talk about the main points of CSS that we need to know for now. CSS is cascading style sheets. It's a language used to specify the style for HTML documents. You can apply one CSS file to various HTML documents. CSS was created in 1997 by a World Wide Web consortium. What else? I think that's the main aspects of CSS. Those are the main aspects of CSS for now. In our next class, we'll go into more in-depth stuff. Okay. So for now, just ruminate on that. Think about it. Try and clearly understand why it was made. That will help you in your design, because a lot of times when people are learning CSS, they tend to do a lot of inline styling your HTML. Of course, like I always say, in programming you can achieve the same results several different ways, but that doesn't mean there is no optimal way of achieving that result. There is best practice. As with any profession, there's always a best practice. So if you don't understand the purpose and the function of CSS, going on, you really struggle as how to implement it. So take time out to just really think about it. So CSS is a language for specifying how documents are presented to users, how they are styled, laid out, designed, etc. A document is usually a text file structured using a markup language. HTML is the most common markup language, but you also come across other markup languages such as SVG or XML. Okay, presenting a document to a user means converting it into a suitable form for your audience. Browsers like Firefox, Chrome, Safari are designed to present documents visually. For example, on a computer screen, a projector, a phone, a television, for example. All these are ways in which browsers present documents to users. So how does CSS affect HTML? Because these two are like twins, right? They always go hand in hand. It's almost impossible to find HTML without CSS nowadays. So how does CSS affect HTML? That's the question. Web browsers apply CSS rules to a document to affect how they are displayed. A CSS rule is formed by a set of properties which have values set to update how the HTML content is displayed. For example, the element width is 50% of its parent element and its background to be red. A selector, which selects the elements you want to apply the updated property values to. For example, the application of a CSS rule to all the paragraphs in a HTML document. Okay, so a set of CSS rules contained within a style sheet determines how a web page should look. So how does CSS affect HTML? Forgetting or compressing all this plenty talk into a very simple, easy to remember explanation is we use CSS rules to target HTML elements, and the CSS rules are created using properties and selectors. So we use the properties to give the specific action that we want it to change, or the specific design or specific style that we want, while we use the selector to target the HTML element. That's basically the relationship between CSS and HTML. So, okay, this example, CSS example 2. Let me show you what it looks like. Now, this is the example. So currently, we know we've made many HTML files, right? So let's say we want to have a background of yellow, a text color of blue or red. How do we do that? We do that using CSS. Let me try and find the CSS code to show you how it works. Skip all this. Yes, so this is the HTML. This is the boring looking HTML with no style whatsoever. Then this is the CSS file. As you can see, it has HTML elements here, and some style like color, background color, border, and so on, right? So this is the CSS code to achieve this result that we see up here. So how does CSS work? How does whatever we write in our text editor get converted into beautiful styles and layouts that we see on different websites? So when a browser displays a document, it must combine the document's content with its style information. It processes the document in 2 stages. The browser converts HTML and CSS into the DOM, document object model. Pay attention to that. So we're looking at that a lot as web developers. It's very important. The DOM represents the document the document in the computer's memory. It combines the document's content with its style. So that's basically what the DOM does. It represents the document in your laptop's memory or your device's memory, and it combines the HTML, the CSS, the JavaScript, just merges all of them together. So the browser displays the content of the DOM. So first of all, we have load HTML, parse HTML, process HTML. And we have load CSS, parse CSS, which then combines into create a DOM tree. So after this DOM tree is created, this is what your browser then displays. So all this happens in your browser behind the scenes, right? Happens in milliseconds. It just loads your HTML, passes your HTML, loads your CSS, passes your CSS, combines both of them together in your DOM tree, and it displays it. That's basically a very toned down, summarized explanation of what happens behind the scene, but it's enough to just get you started. So how to apply your CSS to your HTML? Going back to this example that we see up here, we know that this is a HTML document that already has CSS applied to it, and we are shown both the HTML here, which is what we're familiar with, and the CSS, which is what we're trying to get familiar with now. But the question now is, how was the CSS applied to the HTML? So there are 3 different ways to apply CSS to an HTML document that you commonly come across. Some are more useful than others, of course. There are 3 ways of inserting the style sheets. So we have external style sheets, internal style sheets, and inline style sheets. So let's look at the first one, which is by far the best way to do it, especially if you're working with different HTML documents or you're working on a very large project, right? So the external style sheet, you've already seen external style sheets previously, but not by that name. An external style sheet is where you have your CSS written in a separate file with a .css extension, and you reference it from HTML link element. The HTML file looks something like this. So this is the perfect example. If you can look closely here, under your title, we have a link element. And what that element does is that it connects your CSS to the HTML. So it is a tag that has an attribute of rel, which usually takes the value of style sheets. Then we have the href, which specifies the location of the style sheet you want to add. Then inside the href attribute, we give it a value of the name of the file and the file type. So here the name of the file is style of course the file tag will be .css. So the name of your CSS file can be bottle.css, table.css, style4.css. The name doesn't have to be style, right? You can give it any name you want. But when linking it to your HTML, in your href attribute, you have to always specify the right name which you have given it. And of course, when naming your HTML file, CSS file, JavaScript, in fact, when you are programming generally, try to avoid putting spaces in your name. It makes it a bit complicated. So just if you want to write more than one word, either you use camel casing or you separate them with a hyphen now or a dash. Just separate them with a symbol, and there are some symbols that are accepted, some are not. But just avoid using a space in your. So you want to say main style, you now write main space style. No, you have to put them together, okay, to avoid issues. But that's a bit of a diversion, so let's go back to it. We're talking about external style sheet. So this is what you put in your HTML to specify that, okay, this is the style sheet that I want you to use to style these documents. Then in your CSS, you write your styles like this. So CSS doesn't necessarily have a rigid syntax like HTML, in the sense that you don't have to write any doc type, CSS, opening, CSS tag, closing. In fact, CSS don't even use tags, right? The only thing your CSS needs is your selectors and your properties. That's basically it. So these are what we call selectors. We'll still look at them further on. But if you look closely, we have H1 here. If you check your HTML, you also have a H1 here. So the H1 here says hello world, and here they said H1 color blue. If we go back to our design, you'll see that the text color here is blue. Okay, so the HTML brought the structure, it brought the content, which is hello world, and the CSS provided the style, the color, the background, the border, and all those things. Okay, so this method is arguably the best, like I said, as you can use one style sheet to style multiple documents. Alright, I believe that's clear. If you have any questions, always ask questions. A big part of programming or learning how to code is community. If you don't have people that you can reach out to, or someone to help you when you're having this problem here, that problem here, in fact, you even get discouraged, you get tired, you get frustrated, and you leave it. So don't have unanswered questions at the back of your mind. Always reach out, always ask your questions. Try your possible best to be integrated into a community. It's very important. So back to it. Internal style sheets. An internal style sheet is where you have an external CSS file, but instead place your CSS inside a style element contained inside the HTML head. So the HTML will look like this. Alright, so when it comes to this internal style sheets, you put your style, or you put your CSS styles, whatever, inside your HTML document, but not just anywhere. Put it inside the head tags. So as you can see here, this is the opening head tag, and this is the closing head tag, and inside it we have our CSS style. So we have the style here. So that's the only difference with an external style sheet. In an external style sheet, we don't have to specify style opening tag or style closing tag. But if we're writing an internal style sheet, then we have to specify the style opening tag and the style closing tag. And also, do not forget it. You should always put your style tag or your style element inside the head tag, the head part of your HTML document, not the body. Then that's where you can write this styling, right? And it's exactly the same styling that was used in the external document. So we'll go ahead and try this after this class, so you can see what it looks like. But ideally, you should have the exact same result, right? There are just different ways of achieving the same result. This can be useful in some circumstances. Maybe you are working with a content management system where you can't modify the CSS files directly, but isn't quite as efficient as external style sheets. In a website, the CSS would need to be repeated across every page. So that's now the disadvantage of internal styling. So if you have home page, you put the home page style in the home page HTML document. If you have an about page, you have to put another style tag in your about HTML document. Same goes for contact page. So you just keep rewriting oftentimes the same styles. So you keep writing, and it's not an efficient way to work at all. Okay, so we have the final one, which is inline styles. Inline styles are CSS declarations that affect one element only, contained within a style attribute. So as you can see, this one, you don't have to create a style element in the head part of your HTML document. All you have to do is to specify style attributes inside your elements that you want to give that style. So of course inside the opening tag, like we've done in the past. Every attribute in HTML is always put in the opening tag of that element. Okay, sorry, this was the one I was supposed to highlight. So I'm trying to highlight the fact that the tag starts here and it ends here, so that you know that it is inside the opening tag. Okay, so we can see style has color blue, background color yellow, border 1 pixel, solid black, and this same setup should give us the same results with this, same results with this, and they should all look like this when tried individually. Okay, and okay, this can be useful in some circumstances. Is this the one we're looking for? No, this is not the one we're looking for. Yeah. The only time you might have to resort to using inline styles is when your working environment is really restrictive. Perhaps your content management system only allows you to edit the HTML body. Okay, so ideally you should stay away from this, except you have no way to specify external CSS file, or you have no way to access the head part of your HTML document, and you only have access to the body. So this is the way to go in that case. So CSS syntax, at its most basic level, CSS consists of two building blocks: properties, human readable identifiers that indicate which specific features, e.g. font, width, background color, you want to change; values, each specified property is given a value which indicates how you want to change those stylistic features, e.g. the font, width, or background color. So let me use this to explain it. So CSS basically consists of properties and values, right? So every CSS declaration has properties. This color now, oh god, I'm so terrible at this. So terrible at this. No, that's definitely not what I wanted. Attempt to do that again. Okay, I think this is better. So this is a property. Same with this. Property, color, background color. Same with this border. It's a property. And every property also has a value, right? So let's represent that using the green. Color, blue, background color, yellow, border 1 px, solid black, right? And if you go through all the CSS code, you realize all property value, property value, property value, property value. Same goes here, property value, property value, property value. So right, CSS is all about learning what properties change, what you want to change, and the values that comes with that property. Because of course you cannot say font blue. That doesn't work. If you want to change the color of text, you use color blue. If you want to change font, you cannot just say font, you say font size 16px, right? So we are going to learn how to use these values, how to combine the right values with the right properties to achieve the desired results that we want. Okay, so let's go back. So a property paired with a value is called a CSS declaration. CSS declarations are put within CSS declaration blocks. CSS declaration blocks are paired with selectors to produce CSS rule sets or CSS rules. So let's take it from top down, right? Let's take it from top down so that we understand this whole explanation. So this is what we call a CSS declaration. This whole thing is a CSS declaration. So the property and value mixed together is a CSS declaration, right? And a CSS declaration is put inside a CSS declaration block. A CSS declaration block is made up of this whole thing here, right? So okay, let me do this from here. From here to here is a CSS declaration block, and inside the CSS declaration block we have several CSS declarations. Color blue, a declaration. Background color yellow is a declaration. Border 1px solid black is a declaration, right? And they are inside a declaration block. So this is what starts a declaration block, this is what ends a declaration block. This curly braces here, the left curly braces starts it, the right curly braces ends it. So now a CSS declaration block paired with a selector, which is this H1 here, is what we call a CSS rule set. So this whole thing here, pardon my really terrible drawing, it's a CSS rule set. Okay, this is a CSS rule set. So that is basically what they were trying to explain here. Property paired with a value is a CSS declaration. CSS declarations are put inside CSS declaration blocks. CSS declaration blocks paired with selectors to produce CSS rule sets or CSS rules. That's basically it. Okay. So what do we have here? Okay, we have just another example of external CSS. So here you can see that they added the UL element, so on others list, some list items, and they gave them a style of text decoration underline. So if you check the design here, they should be underlined, and they have a color of red because the paragraph was given a color of red here. Okay, so that's basically it. So you can see we've come across another another property rather called text decoration, and it carries a value of underline. Okay, so this is basically what CSS is all about. Using properties and values to get the desired style and design that you want. We'll not be doing anything outside the scope of this. So, like I explained before, this is a CSS declaration. Background color. So it has a property, it has a value, and it also has a colon that separates the property and value. So you always separate your property and value with a colon. If we check all the other examples, you see there's a colon here, there's a colon here, there's a colon here, there's a colon here, there's a colon here. So you always separate the property and value with a colon. So setting CSS properties to specific values is the core function of the CSS language. The CSS engine calculates which declaration applies to every single element of a page in order to appropriately lay it out and style it. The property and value in each pair is separated by a colon. There are more than 300 different properties in CSS and nearly an infinite number of values. So of course, we are going to learn how to use them. We're not going to cram them because there is no way you are going to be able to cram all the properties and values in CSS, right? But you're going to learn how to use them, how to apply them. Once you know how they work, you can generally do anything you want with it. Okay. It's also the place of checking documentations. It's the place of Googling. It's even the place of using AI. Because a lot of times you cannot even remember what specific property and value you want to use. But thank God now we have tools to easily help us with that. So we have CSS declaration blocks. Declarations are grouped in blocks, with each set of declarations being wrapped by opening curly braces and a closing one. So I've explained this earlier, I don't think I need to explain it again. Each declaration contained inside a declaration block has to be separated by a semicolon. Okay, this is something I've not explained before. Okay, I've done. God, okay, great, this is better. So if you can clearly see here, this is a semicolon, and we use that to separate different CSS declarations. So let's just go back up to this example. We have a declaration block that has 3 different CSS declarations, and they are all separated by this semicolon. So in CSS, it is mandatory to write a semicolon at the end of your CSS declaration if you are going to write another one after it. That's when it is mandatory. So for this one that I said P color red, even if you don't write this semicolon here, it will still work perfectly fine. Same with this one here, because there's only one declaration there and there's no other one that comes after it. So if it's the only one, or if it is the last declaration, it is not mandatory to put it. Everything will still work as usual. But it is advisable, it is best practice to always write it at the end of your CSS declaration so that you don't forget to write it at the end of the day. Okay? Trust me, there are many times you stare at your code for more than an hour trying to figure out why it's not working or what is wrong, only to figure out that you forgot to write a semicolon somewhere. But thankfully, we have text editors now that automatically add this for us at the end of every CSS declaration. Okay. So where were we? Okay, yeah, over here. Yeah. Great. So this is a CSS declaration block, like I explained. It starts with the left curly braces, closes with the right curly braces. Like I said, let me highlight this. Okay, let me highlight this. So terrible at this, man. Okay, let me try again. I think this is it. The semicolon is not necessary, but good practice. Why is it not necessary? It is not necessary because that is the last CSS declaration. There's no other one that is coming after it. That's the basic reason why it's not necessary. Okay. CSS selectors and roles. We are missing one part of the puzzle. We need to discuss how to tell our declaration blocks which elements they should be applied to. This is done by prefixing each declaration block with a selector, a pattern that matches some elements on the page. The associated declarations will be applied to those elements only. the selector plus the declaration block is called a rule set or a rule. So basically we have a style here, background color red, background style none. But what does this get applied to in our HTML? That is where selectors come in. And there are several types of selectors, but I'm not going into that yet. So this is just a group of selectors. You can see there's a div here, there's a p here, there's an ID here, and there's a pseudo element here. So these are just different types of selectors, all taking the same style: background color red, background style none. So a selector paired with declaration blocks, or a declaration block rather, is called a CSS rule set or a CSS rule. So beyond syntax, make CSS readable. There are some good tips worth knowing to make your CSS code easier to use and maintain. White space. White space means actual spaces, tabs, new lines. You can add white space to make your style sheet more readable in the same manner as HTML. The browser tends to ignore much of the white space inside your CSS. A lot of the white space is just there to aid readability, and trust me, readability is a very big deal. Okay, so always add the white space and new lines where you can to make it clean and readable. Also, we have comments. As with HTML, you are encouraged to make comments in CSS to help you understand how your code works when coming back to it after several months, and to help understand it. And to help others understand it, because of course, in the real world, I'm not the only one that will be interacting with your code. Oftentimes, you are in teams where somebody is handling this, another person is handling that, but we are all working on the same code base. Other people need to know, okay, what happened here? What is this person trying to do here? You know, it makes working with people way more easier. So always trying to leave comments for yourself and for others too. Comments are also useful for temporarily commenting out certain parts of the code for testing purposes. This is also very, very important, right? Because usually we're trying to debug our code to find out, okay, why is this not working? Which part of this is not working? So let's say I comment this out and I expect a change, and that change does not happen. I know, okay, the error or the issue is not coming from this part of the code. So we also use comments to test out our code by commenting on certain sections of it. So for example, if you are trying to find out what part of your code is causing an error exactly, comments in CSS begin with / asterisk and end with asterisk /. Okay, so that's all for now. Of course, I'm not a fan of just taking a lot of theoretical knowledge without practicalizing it. So right as this lesson was going on, my expectation is that you would have your text editor open on one hand and you'll be writing out some code just to test it out, because if you're anything like me, I'm not satisfied with hearing information until I try it out. Because it's in trying it out that I realize that, oh, I do not really understand this. Oh, this is how this actually works. And you get the fulfillment of learning. Okay, learning is a process. It's a journey. It's not something that happens in one day. But learning will not happen if you don't practicalize it. If you are just listening and listening and listening, you don't put that knowledge into action, you never learn it, right? You will just be a bank of information without any knowledge. Okay, so I expect that you will try. You can literally just pause this maybe somewhere around here, copy out to the CSS, pause this somewhere around here, copy out this HTML, and try it out. Like, it doesn't take more than 5 minutes to write this out. It doesn't take more than 3 minutes or 2 minutes to write this out. And you also have your results. Go ahead, try this too. Like, try inline style, try internal style sheets, right? Okay, so in our next class, we'll be looking at introduction to selectors.